Bullying, a cruel act that isolates, belittles, and leaves lasting scars. But sometimes, in moments of darkness, a chance arises, an opportunity to turn ignorance into understanding and cruelty into redemption. In today's story, a young girl in a wheelchair faces more than just mocking words. She confronts prejudice head-on. When an unforeseen emergency unfolds, those who belittled her are forced to reckon with their own actions. But can they truly change? And will she offer them the forgiveness they desperately seek? Before we dive into this emotional tale, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you're inspired by stories of courage and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. The park buzzed with life that afternoon. The California sun shone brightly, casting golden light over the playground, picnic tables, and the basketball court. Tanya, a 16-year-old with a quiet but determined spirit, arrived at the park, her hands skillfully maneuvering the wheels of her chair. To most people, the park was just a place to relax or have fun. For Tanya, it was her sanctuary. It was a space where she could find peace under the shade of an old oak tree, away from the stares and whispers she often encountered. She rolled over to her usual spot, a bench nestled beside the tree. From there, she had the perfect view of the basketball court where kids her age played spirited games. Reaching into her bag, Tanya pulled out her well-worn copy of Mice and Men. The book's cover was faded and its pages were dog-eared, but to her, it was a treasure. Reading transported her to worlds where physical limitations didn't exist and where her imagination could soar freely. As she turned the first page, the sounds of the park blended into a familiar soundtrack. The rhythmic bounce of basketballs, bursts of laughter, and the chatter of parents keeping an eye on their kids. Tanya glanced up briefly, observing the players. Chris, a tall boy with an impressive jump shot, seemed to be the unofficial leader of the group, always shouting directions and passing the ball strategically. Will, his best friend, was quick on his feet, darting around defenders with ease. Tanya watched them with a bittersweet smile. Once upon a time, she'd been just like them, running, jumping, feeling the exhilaration of a good game. But life had taken a different turn, and her wheelchair had become a permanent part of her reality. Even so, Tanya refused to let it define her. She was more than just an observer. She was a strategist. Her sharp eyes noticed patterns others missed. Chris always glanced at his left foot before making a big shot, and Will hesitated for a fraction of a second before passing to a teammate. Tanya could almost predict their next moves. Still, there was an ache in her heart. She longed to be part of their camaraderie, to feel included. But she had tried that before, and the results had been painfully disappointing. People either ignored her, unsure of what to say, or they treated her with pity, which stung even more. So, she had learned to keep to herself, channeling her energy into her books and her thoughts. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the peaceful rhythm of the park shifted. Tanya's quiet focus on her book was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of loud, boisterous voices. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan had arrived. They weren't just any kids. They were the loudest, most confident boys in the neighborhood. Jake, tall with a cocky grin, led the pack. Ethan, thinner but quick-witted, was always ready with a sarcastic comment. Ryan, stockier and louder than the other two, thrived on attention. Their presence changed the dynamic of the park instantly. The younger kids on the basketball court quickly cleared out, handing the space over to the trio without complaint. As they started their game, Jake noticed Tanya sitting under the tree. He smirked and elbowed Ethan. "Look who's here again," he said loudly, making sure his voice carried. "Miss Wheels, always watching, never playing." Ethan snorted. "Think she's here scouting for the NBA? Maybe she's writing a book about how real athletes play." Ryan laughed, picking up the ball. "Or maybe she's just waiting for us to ask her to ref. Oh, wait. She can't stand up to make the calls." Their laughter echoed across the park, sharp and mocking. Tanya's fingers tightened around her book. She kept her head down, refusing to meet their eyes. "Hey, Tanya," Jake called out, his tone dripping with mockery. "Why don't you roll over here and show us what you've got? Bet you'd be a pro at sitting courtside." Ethan doubled over laughing, while Ryan clapped Jake on the back. Their taunts grew bolder, feeding off each other's cruelty. Tanya closed her eyes briefly, willing herself to stay calm. She had heard worse before, but it didn't make the words sting any less. Jake missed a shot, and the basketball rolled across the court, coming to rest near Tanya's wheelchair. Spotting an opportunity, Jake exaggeratedly stumbled toward her, mimicking her movements with over-the-top gestures. "Oops," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like I need wheels to improve my game." Ethan and Ryan burst into laughter. "Yeah," Ethan added. "Maybe we should all sit down to play. It'd be a whole new level of competition." Ryan crouched low, pretending to push an invisible wheelchair. "I'm Tanya," he said in a high-pitched voice. "I come to the park to watch the pros because, I'm basically a sports analyst." Their cruel mimicry sent waves of laughter through their group. Tanya clenched her jaw, gripping the edges of her book tightly. Her knuckles turned white as she fought back the tears threatening to spill. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The boys didn't stop. If anything, their taunts grew louder and more vicious. Ryan picked up the basketball and spun it on his finger, glancing toward Tanya. "Hey, wheelchair wonder," he shouted. "How about you referee our game?" "Oh wait, you can't even get on the court." Jake doubled over, holding his stomach as he laughed. "Yeah, Ryan, but she'd still probably make better calls than you." Ethan, eager to join in, pretended to push himself forward in an imaginary wheelchair, making exaggerated squeaking noises with his sneakers. "Look at me," he mocked, hunching over. "I'm Tanya. I'm just here to study everyone because I'm too special to play." Their laughter echoed, filling the park. It drowned out the sounds of other kids playing and the chatter of parents nearby. Tanya sat frozen, her book clenched in her hands. Her usual ability to brush off cruel comments was faltering under the sheer relentlessness of their attack. A single tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, hoping no one had noticed. But inside, her heart felt like it was breaking. At that moment, a new voice broke through the jeers. "Jake! Jake!" Jake turned and groaned when he saw his little sister, Lily, skipping toward the court. The 7-year-old's blonde pigtails bobbed as she waved enthusiastically. "Go play somewhere else, Lily," Jake snapped, clearly annoyed. "We're busy." Unfazed by her brother's tone, Lily shrugged and wandered off, her curiosity leading her to the edge of the park. A steep embankment loomed ahead, dropping sharply into a rocky creek bed. Signs warning "keep off" were posted along the edge, but Lily, entranced by the shiny rocks glinting in the sunlight, didn't notice them. She edged closer, her small sneakers kicking loose bits of gravel as she leaned forward to get a better look. The ground beneath her was unstable, shifting slightly with her weight. Back on the court, Ryan noticed her absence first. "Hey, Jake," he said, nudging his friend. "Where's your sister?" "Didn't she just come over here?" Jake glanced around, his brow furrowing. "She's probably at the swings," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Tanya, from her spot under the tree, had been watching Lily. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the little girl nearing the edge of the slope. Tanya's eyes widened in alarm. "Lily!" she called out, her voice cutting through the noise of the park. The boys turned, following Tanya's gaze. Their laughter abruptly stopped when they saw Lily teetering dangerously close to the edge of the embankment. "Lily!" Jake shouted, panic flooding his voice. Lily turned toward the sound of her brother's voice, but her movement caused the ground beneath her feet to shift. She wobbled, her arms flailing as she struggled to regain her balance. The boys stood frozen in fear, their earlier bravado replaced by paralyzing helplessness. While the boys remained rooted to the spot, Tanya didn't hesitate. Her book fell to the ground as she gripped the wheels of her chair with determined hands. "Lily, hold on!" she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Tanya's arms worked furiously as she propelled herself forward. The uneven ground jolted her chair with every bump, but she didn't slow down. Her focus was entirely on the little girl in danger. "Lily, stay still," Tanya urged, her voice firm and reassuring. As Tanya reached the edge, she positioned her wheelchair strategically, using it to block Lily from slipping further. With a quick, practiced motion, Tanya locked her wheels and leaned forward, grabbing Lily's arm. "I've got you," Tanya said, her voice calm despite her racing heart. Lily's wide, tear-filled eyes met Tanya's, and the little girl froze, her trembling body slowly steadied by Tanya's firm grip. Inch by inch, Tanya pulled Lily away from the edge until they were both safely back on solid ground. Jake reached them moments later, his face pale and stricken. He dropped to his knees and pulled Lily into his arms, holding her tightly. "Lily," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Are you okay?" Lily nodded, still clinging to Tanya's hand. "I'm fine," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake looked up at Tanya, his face a mixture of relief, gratitude, and overwhelming shame. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He could only stare at the girl he'd mocked just minutes earlier, the girl who had just saved his sister's life. I don't," Jake stammered, his voice cracking. "I don't even know what to say. You saved her." Tanya, still catching her breath, offered a small, tired smile. "She's okay," she said simply, brushing off his gratitude. Ethan and Ryan arrived seconds later, their faces pale and their earlier cockiness completely gone. They exchanged guilty glances, unable to look Tanya in the eye. Jake, still clutching Lily tightly, turned to Tanya, his eyes brimming with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice heavy with guilt. "What you did, it's more than I could ever repay. He trailed off, words failing him. Ethan shuffled his feet nervously. "We've been such jerks," he mumbled, barely audible. Ryan nodded, his usual booming voice reduced to a quiet murmur. "You didn't deserve any of the things we said, and after what you just did, I don't even know how to face you." Tanya looked at the three boys, her expression unreadable. She didn't rush to fill the silence, letting their discomfort hang in the air. It was clear that they were grappling with the weight of their actions. Finally, Tanya spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You're right," she said. "I didn't deserve it, and what you did hurt me." The boys flinched at her words, guilt etched across their faces. Tanya's gaze softened slightly as she continued. "But everyone makes mistakes," she added. "The important thing is what you do next. Are you going to keep tearing people down, or are you going to learn to be better?" Her words landed like a heavy weight on their shoulders. The boys exchanged uneasy glances, the full impact of what she'd said sinking in. Jake stood up slowly, his arms still wrapped protectively around Lily. "We'll do better," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I swear we will." Lily, still holding Tanya's hand, looked up at her with wide, admiring eyes. "You're so brave," she said softly, her small voice carrying more sincerity than any of her brother's earlier boasts. Tanya smiled at the little girl, her earlier tension melting away. "Thanks, Lily. You're pretty brave, too." Jake knelt beside Tanya's wheelchair, his expression earnest. "I'm so sorry for the way we treated you," he said, his voice cracking. "You didn't deserve any of it. I don't know if you can forgive us, but thank you. Thank you for saving my sister." Tanya nodded slowly, her smile gentle but firm. "Apology accepted," she said. "But words are only part of it. Make sure your actions match." Jake nodded, his face flushing. "I will. I promise." Ethan and Ryan stepped forward, their discomfort evident, but their remorse genuine. "We're sorry too," Ethan said, his voice shaky. "We were so wrong. You're incredible, and we couldn't see it because we were being jerks." Ryan added, "Yeah, I don't think I'll ever forget what you did today. Thank you, Tanya, for everything." Tanya met their gazes, her calm demeanor never wavering. "Thank you for apologizing," she said. "I hope you remember this, and maybe next time you'll think before you speak." The boys nodded solemnly, her words striking a chord deep within them. From that day on, Jake, Ethan, and Ryan made an effort to include Tanya in the life of the park, They invited her to watch their games, not from the sidelines, but from a spot closer to the action. They even asked her for advice on strategies, amazed by her sharp observations. For Tanya, the park felt different now. The weight of being an outsider had lifted, replaced by the possibility of new friendships. Though she knew it wouldn't erase the past, she appreciated the boys' genuine efforts to change. The experience left an impact on everyone involved. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan carried the memory of that day as a reminder of the harm they had caused, and the courage and grace it took for Tanya to save Lily despite their cruelty. Tanya's story is more than an act of heroism. It's a testament to the strength it takes to rise above prejudice and to offer forgiveness to those who may not deserve it. Her bravery didn't just save a life, it transformed hearts. If this story inspired you, let us know in the comments below. How do you think we can create a world where kindness outweighs cruelty? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that uplift, challenge, and remind us of the power of humanity. Tanya's words had settled deeply into the boys' hearts, yet the arrival of Mrs. Harper and her emotional reaction shifted the atmosphere again. Her tearful gratitude for Tanya's bravery left everyone in quiet awe. The boys stood silently, their earlier cockiness replaced with a raw, uncomfortable humility. They watched as Mrs. Harper, still clutching her daughter, turned back to Tanya, her eyes filled with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "You saved Lily's life," Mrs. Harper said again, shaking her head in amazement. "But you didn't hesitate, did you?" Tanya shrugged modestly. "There wasn't time to think," she admitted. "I just acted." Mrs. Harper placed a hand over her heart, as if trying to steady the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "Most people wouldn't have done what you did, Tanya. What you did, it's beyond heroic. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank you enough." Jake, still kneeling beside Tanya's wheelchair, glanced up at his mother. "Mom," he said softly, "you should know, we weren't kind to Tanya before today. She forgave us, but we don't deserve it." Mrs. Harper frowned, her sharp gaze snapping toward her son. "What do you mean?" Ethan stepped forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "We were bullies, Mrs. Harper," he confessed, his voice trembling. "We made fun of her, called her names. We were horrible." Ryan nodded, his eyes focused on the ground. "But she saved Lily anyway. He paused, struggling to find the right words. "She's more of a person than we'll ever be." Tanya watched the boys with quiet compassion, but Mrs. Harper's expression was unreadable. She took a deep breath, clearly struggling to process what she'd just learned. "I'm disappointed in you boys," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "But I'm glad you've realized how wrong you were. The real question is, what are you going to do about it?" Her words struck a chord with the boys, and they exchanged uncertain glances. Jake spoke first. "We want to make it right, Mom. We really do. We're going to make sure Tanya knows we're sorry, and that we mean it." Tanya's lips quirked into a small, forgiving smile. "You're already doing that," she said simply. Mrs. Harper seemed to hesitate, her gaze lingering on Tanya. Then, as if remembering something important, her eyes widened and she drew in a sharp breath. "Oh my goodness," she murmured, pressing a hand to her mouth. "You're that girl, aren't you? From the bus station?" Tanya stiffened slightly, her cheeks flushing. She cast her eyes downward, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "Yes, ma'am," she admitted softly. "The bus station?" Jake repeated, looking between his mother and Tanya in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Harper turned to her son and his friends, her expression somber. "Last year," she began, her voice heavy with emotion, "there was an accident at the downtown bus station. A little boy wandered onto the road just as a bus was coming around the corner." She paused, her voice catching in her throat. "A young girl, Tanya, pushed him out of the way. She saved his life, but she was hit by the bus instead." The boys' eyes widened as the weight of Mrs. Harper's words sank in. They turned to Tanya, who sat quietly in her wheelchair, her expression calm but tinged with sadness. "That girl was you?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tanya nodded, keeping her gaze focused on her hands. "It was," she said simply. Ethan's voice was thick with awe as he said, "You saved a kid's life. And it cost you?" Tanya shrugged, her humility shining through. "It cost me the use of my legs," she confirmed. "But that little boy is safe, and that's what matters." The air around the group felt heavy as the weight of Tanya's story settled over them. The boys, who had spent the better part of their day mocking her, now looked at her with a mixture of awe and guilt. "You saved someone's life," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stared at Tanya as if seeing her for the first time. "And it cost you so much, I don't even know what to say." Tanya offered a small smile, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to say anything. I did what anyone would have done." "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "Not anyone. You're incredible, and we were—" He stopped, his voice faltering under the weight of his shame. "We were cruel," Ryan finished for him, "and you forgave us anyway. You didn't just save Lily's life. You've shown us what it means to be a decent person." Mrs. Harper, who had been quietly listening, reached out and placed a hand on Tanya's shoulder. "You have a heart bigger than anyone I've ever known," she said, her voice trembling. "And I'm so sorry that I didn't take the time to know you sooner." Tanya blushed under the praise, her humility shining through. "It's okay," she said softly. "We all have our own struggles. I'm just glad Lily is safe." Lily, still clinging to her mother, looked up at Tanya with wide, awe-filled eyes. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice filled with childlike wonder. "Is Tanya a real-life superhero?" Mrs. Harper smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, stroking Lily's hair. "In every way that matters, she is." Lily hesitated for a moment before stepping out of her mother's embrace. She approached Tanya, her small hands clasped nervously in front of her. "Thank you for saving me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're my hero." Tanya felt her heart melt at the little girl's words. She leaned forward slightly, her expression warm. "You're very welcome, Lily," she said gently. "I'm just glad you're safe." Lily's eyes sparkled with determination as she said, "I want to be a hero just like you when I grow up." The group fell silent, touched by the little girl's innocent declaration. Tanya felt a lump form in her throat, but she managed a smile. "Being a hero isn't something you need to grow up for," she told Lily. "It's about being kind and brave, no matter how small the action." "I'll try my best," Lily said earnestly, her voice filled with conviction. As Tanya reached out to hold Lily's hand, a sense of pride and humility washed over her. She had never seen herself as a role model, but the admiration shining in Lily's eyes made her realize the impact her actions had made. The boys stood quietly nearby, watching the interaction between Tanya and Lily with tear-filled eyes. The weight of their earlier actions pressed down on them, a heavy reminder of how wrong they had been. Jake was the first to step forward, his shoulders squared but his expression vulnerable. "Tanya," he began, his voice cracking. "I don't think we'll ever be able to make up for the way we treated you. But I promise, we'll do everything we can to try." Ethan nodded, his usual confidence replaced by quiet sincerity. "We were wrong about you, Tanya, and we're sorry. Really, really sorry." Ryan wiped at his eyes, his voice thick with emotion. "You're the bravest person we've ever met, and we treated you like you didn't matter. We'll never do anything like that again. We swear." Tanya looked at each of them in turn, her expression calm but thoughtful. She could see the genuine remorse in their eyes, the way they fidgeted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I believe you," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "But words are easy. What matters is what you do from here on out." Jake nodded solemnly. "You're right," he said, "and we're going to prove it to you. We want to make things better, for you and for anyone else who's ever felt left out or judged. Tanya's eyes widened slightly, surprised by his determination. That's a good start, she said with a small smile. As the group continued talking, Ryan's face lit up with an idea. What if we made the park better for kids like Tanya? He suggested, his excitement growing with every word. Jake turned to him, intrigued. What do you mean? We could organize a fundraiser, Ryan explained. Raise money to add accessible equipment to the playground, maybe even smooth out some of the paths for wheelchairs. Ethan's eyes lit up as he added, and we could spread the word at school. Get more people involved, maybe even the city council. Jake nodded, the gears in his mind already turning. It's the least we can do after everything Tanya's been through and everything she's done for us. Tanya listened quietly, her heart swelling at the boys' enthusiasm. She had never expected them to go to such lengths to make amends, but their sincerity was undeniable. That sounds amazing, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you. All of you. Jake smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. No, he said firmly. Thank you, Tanya. For everything. The boys wasted no time putting their plan into motion. The very next day, Jake, Ethan, and Ryan met in Jake's living room with notebooks and a laptop spread out on the coffee table. All right, Jake began, his voice steady with determination. If we're going to make this happen, we need a solid plan. First things first, how do we raise the money? Ryan leaned forward, scribbling ideas in his notebook. We could do a car wash, he suggested. Everyone loves a car wash, and we could get our friends to help. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. What about a bake sale? My mom makes these killer brownies, and I'm sure she'd help out. Jake's eyes lit up as he added, we could do both, and maybe even set up a booth at school to collect donations. If we explain why we're doing it, I bet a lot of people will pitch in. The boys' excitement grew as they brainstormed, their guilt over their past actions fueling their determination to make a difference. They knew that this wasn't just about making the park more accessible. It was about proving to Tanya and to themselves that they could be better. A week later, Tanya arrived at the park to find an unexpected sight. A group of kids and parents were gathered near the playground, holding signs that read, "Fundraiser for Accessibility," and "Make the Park for Everyone." Jake spotted her first and waved her over. "Tanya," he called out, his face breaking into a wide grin. Tanya rolled closer, her brow furrowing in confusion. "What's going on?" she asked. Ryan stepped forward, beaming with pride. "This is for you, or, well, for people like you," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "We're raising money to make the park more accessible, better paths, new equipment, the works." Ethan chimed in, holding up a sign that read, "Every kid deserves to play." "We've already raised $500 from the car wash and bake sale," he said, "and we're just getting started." Tanya's mouth fell open as she looked around at the bustling scene. Kids were washing cars in the parking lot, parents were buying baked goods, and a group of teens had set up a booth to collect donations. You did all this?" Tanya asked, her voice trembling. Jake nodded, his expression serious. "We told you we wanted to make things right," he said. "This is just the beginning." Tanya felt a lump form in her throat as tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Jake replied with a smile. "This is our way of showing you, and everyone else, that we've changed." Word of the boys' efforts spread quickly through the neighborhood. Parents, teachers, and local businesses pitched in, donating money, supplies, and their time to the cause. The boys were overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, but they worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. At school, they gave a heartfelt presentation during assembly, sharing Tanya's story and their own journey from ignorance to understanding. They spoke openly about their mistakes, encouraging their peers to think twice before judging others. By the end of their speech, the auditorium was filled with applause, and more than a few tears. Months later, Tanya returned to the park to find it transformed. Smooth, paved paths wound through the playground, leading to brand new equipment designed to accommodate kids of all abilities. A bright sign at the entrance read, "Everyone's Park, a place for all to play." Tanya's eyes widened as she took it all in. She spotted Jake, Ethan, and Ryan standing near the swings, waving her over with excited smiles. "What do you think?" Jake asked as Tanya rolled up beside them. "It's incredible," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't even have the words to thank you." "You don't need to," Ryan said with a grin. "This was the least we could do." Tanya looked at the boys, her heart swelling with gratitude. They had gone from her tormentors to her allies, proving that change was possible, and that even the smallest acts of kindness could lead to something extraordinary. The grand opening of the inclusive park was nothing short of a community-wide celebration. Balloons swayed in the breeze, tied to every available post and tree, and the air buzzed with laughter and chatter. The playground, now a testament to unity and inclusion, gleamed under the bright morning sun. Families arrived in waves, children darting excitedly to explore the new equipment. Parents marveled at the transformation, noting the widened paths, the adaptive swings, and the sensory play areas designed for kids of all abilities. Tanya sat near the entrance, taking it all in, her heart swelling with pride. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan had worked tirelessly alongside countless volunteers to ensure the event was perfect. The boys were everywhere at once, directing traffic, greeting families, and even handing out ice cream cones to delighted kids. "Look at this place," Jake said to Ethan as they helped set up the face painting booth. "It's hard to believe it was the same park we used to hang out in. It's so much more now." "It's not just the park that changed," Ethan replied, glancing toward Tanya, who was chatting with a group of kids near the swings. "We've changed too." Ryan jogged up to join them, a grin on his face. "Guys, you won't believe it. They're doing a segment on the news about the park," he said, holding up his phone. "We're gonna be famous." Jake laughed, clapping Ryan on the back. "Famous for the right reasons this time," he said. As the day wore on, Tanya found herself at the center of attention. People from all walks of life approached her to express their gratitude and admiration. She was shy at first, unused to so much attention, but the kindness she felt was overwhelming in the best way. A local journalist approached her, microphone in hand. "Tanya," she began, smiling warmly, "how does it feel to see the impact you've had on this community?" Tanya hesitated, glancing around the park. She saw a young boy in a wheelchair laughing as he spun on the new merry-go-round. She saw Lily, giggling with her new friends as they painted colorful designs on each other's faces. She saw Jake, Ethan, and Ryan working tirelessly to make sure everyone was having a great time. "It feels incredible," Tanya said finally, her voice steady but emotional. "When all this started, I never imagined it would lead to something so beautiful. This park is more than just a place to play. It's a reminder that everyone belongs, and I'm just so grateful to be part of that." The journalist nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Tanya," she said. "You're an inspiration to all of us." Later in the afternoon, the crowd gathered around the center of the park, where a large blue cloth covered an unknown object. Jake stood at the microphone, his nerves visible but outweighed by his determination. "Can we have everyone's attention, please?" he said, his voice amplified by the speaker system. "We want to take a moment to thank someone very special." He gestured toward Tanya, who sat near the front of the gathering. "Tanya," Jake continued, "this park wouldn't exist without you. Your bravery, kindness, and strength inspired all of us to be better. We'll never be able to thank you enough, but we hope this is a start." With that, Ethan and Ryan pulled back the cloth, revealing a beautiful wooden bench. The bench was intricately carved with the words, "In honor of Tanya, a true hero. Your strength inspires us all." The crowd erupted in applause as Tanya's hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she read the inscription. Jake stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We wanted this bench to be a permanent part of the park, just like your courage is a permanent part of our lives. Ethan added, "Whenever someone sits here, we hope they'll remember your story and be inspired to be a little kinder, a little braver." Ryan smiled, his usual playfulness replaced by heartfelt sincerity. "Thank you, Tanya, for everything." Tanya wheeled herself closer to the bench, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch the smooth wood. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you so much." As the day wound down, the park emptied out, but the impact of the event lingered in everyone's hearts. Tanya sat quietly on her new bench, watching the last rays of sunlight filter through the trees. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan approached her, their faces tired but content. "Mind if we join you?" Jake asked, gesturing to the bench. "Of course," Tanya said with a smile. The boys sat down beside her, the four of them enjoying the peaceful silence. After a moment, Jake spoke. "You know, Tanya, I think this park is just the beginning." Tanya turned to him, her brow furrowing in curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there's so much more we can do," Jake said, his voice brimming with excitement. "For our school, for other parks, for kids like you all over the city." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, this doesn't have to stop here. We've learned so much from you, and now it's our turn to keep paying it forward." Ryan grinned. "Besides, we've got the best role model ever to keep us on track." Tanya laughed, her cheeks flushing. "You guys are too much," she said, though her smile revealed how touched she was. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in shades of gold and purple, the four friends made a silent promise to each other. They would keep working to make their community, and their world, a better place. And as they sat together on Tanya's bench, they knew they had already taken the first steps towards something extraordinary. The weeks following the park's grand opening were some of the most transformative the community had ever seen. Inspired by Tanya's story, groups of neighbors began brainstorming additional ways to promote inclusivity and kindness in their town. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan became known as advocates for the cause, their reputations completely transformed. They had shifted from being known as troublemakers to leaders, rallying others around the idea that everyone deserved to feel seen and included. At school, the boys worked closely with Tanya to start a club focused on accessibility and empathy. They named it Tanya's Circle, a nod to the bench that had been dedicated in her honor. The club quickly grew, attracting students from all grades who wanted to be part of something meaningful. During their first meeting, Tanya addressed the group, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I first started coming to the park, I felt invisible," she admitted. "I never imagined that one day I'd be part of something like this. You all have the power to make sure no one ever feels that way again." Her words struck a chord with everyone in the room. The club members began planning events, from anti-bullying workshops to community cleanup days, all with the goal of fostering understanding and connection. One afternoon, as the boys and Tanya sat brainstorming new ideas for the club, Ethan suddenly snapped his fingers. "Guys," he said, his eyes lighting up, "what if we took this to the next level, like statewide?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "Statewide? That's ambitious, dude." "Think about it," Ethan pressed. "There are other parks like this one that aren't accessible, other schools that could use clubs like ours. Why stop here when we could help so many more people?" Ryan nodded, his face breaking into an excited grin. "He's right. We could organize fundraisers, petition local governments, maybe even start an online campaign." Tanya listened, her heart swelling with pride at their enthusiasm. "I think it's a great idea," she said, "and if anyone can make it happen, it's you guys." The group spent the rest of the afternoon mapping out their vision. They planned to start with a presentation at a nearby school, sharing Tanya's story and their journey of growth. From there, they would launch a website where people could donate, share their own stories, and get involved in the movement. The presentation was a resounding success. Tanya, Jake, Ethan, and Ryan stood before a packed auditorium, their nerves giving way to determination as they began to speak. Jake started by recounting their initial treatment of Tanya, his voice raw with regret. "We were wrong," he admitted. "We judged her without knowing her, and we hurt her with our words. But Tanya showed us what it means to be strong and kind, even when we didn't deserve it." Tanya took the microphone next, her calm demeanor commanding the room. "Everyone deserves to feel included," she said. "We all have struggles, but when we come together and lift each other up, amazing things can happen." By the time they finished, the audience was on their feet, applauding loudly. Students approached them afterward, eager to learn more and share how the story had moved them. As the months passed, the group's efforts began to gain national attention. Media outlets picked up their story, and their online campaign went viral. Donations poured in, allowing them to fund accessibility projects in parks and schools across the state. Tanya's name became synonymous with courage and inclusivity. She was invited to speak at conferences, where she shared her story and inspired countless others to join the cause. Despite the attention, Tanya remained humble, always redirecting the praise to the collective efforts of her friends and community. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan, too, found themselves transformed by the experience. Their newfound purpose gave them a sense of fulfillment they had never known before. They continued to grow, always striving to be better and to make a difference. One sunny afternoon, Tanya returned to the park where it had all begun. The laughter of children filled the air as families enjoyed the accessible equipment and wide-open spaces. As she wheeled herself toward her bench, she spotted a young girl sitting there, her legs swinging as she read a book. The girl looked up, her eyes lighting up when she saw Tanya. "Are you Tanya?" the girl asked shyly. Tanya smiled. "I am. What's your name?" "Chloe," the girl replied, scooting over to make room. "I've heard so much about you. My mom says you're a hero." Tanya chuckled softly, sitting beside Chloe. "Well, your mom is very kind, but you know, anyone can be a hero. It just takes a little courage and a lot of kindness." Chloe beamed, her admiration evident. "I want to be like you someday." "You already are," Tanya said, her heart swelling with emotion. As the two of them sat together, watching the park buzz with life, Tanya felt a deep sense of peace. She had started this journey feeling invisible, but now she was part of something bigger than herself, a movement that would continue to grow and inspire for years to come. Tanya's story is a testament to the power of empathy, forgiveness, and the belief that change is always possible. What began as a moment of cruelty transformed into a legacy of kindness and inclusion, proving that even the smallest acts of bravery can create ripples that touch countless lives. As the sun set over the park that evening, its golden light casting long shadows on the ground, Tanya's heart was full. She knew this was only the beginning. Months after Tanya received the letter from the Montana teacher, she found herself back in a familiar setting, another park. But this one wasn't yet a haven for inclusivity. The pathways were uneven, the equipment was outdated, and there wasn't a single feature that accommodated kids with disabilities. Tanya was there with Jake, Ethan, Ryan, and several new members of Tanya's circle. The local community had reached out inspired by the success of Tanya's first park project and asked for guidance in transforming their own space. "Okay, team," Jake said, standing at the center of the group with a clipboard in hand. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we've done this before. Let's make it happen." Ethan chimed in, pointing to the broken swing set. "First things first, safety. We'll need to repair or replace anything that's dangerous before we add new equipment." Ryan gestured toward a nearby hill. "And that slope over there? Perfect spot for a sensory garden. We could include plants with different textures and scents, something everyone can enjoy." As the group brainstormed, Tanya listened intently, her notebook open on her lap. She loved seeing how much her friends had grown, not just in their commitment to the cause, but in their creativity and leadership. "Let's make sure we include a space where kids can just be," Tanya suggested. "A quiet area for those who might get overwhelmed." Jake nodded. "Good idea. Maybe we can create a shaded spot with benches and some calming decorations. The project would take months to complete, but the team's determination was unwavering. They had seen firsthand the power of an inclusive park, and they were eager to bring that same joy to another community. One afternoon, as the team worked on the park, Tanya heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, if it isn't the bravest girl I've ever met?" Tanya turned to see Mrs. Harper and Lily approaching, their smiles as bright as ever. Tanya's heart swelled at the sight of them. "Mrs. Harper, Lily!" Tanya exclaimed, wheeling over to greet them. Lily, now a year older and taller, threw her arms around Tanya in a tight hug. "Tanya, I missed you." "I missed you too, sweetheart," Tanya said, holding the little girl close. Mrs. Harper smiled warmly. "We heard about the new project and had to come see it for ourselves. Lily's been talking about you nonstop ever since the park opened." As they chatted, Tanya introduced Mrs. Harper and Lily to the other volunteers. The group welcomed them eagerly, inviting Lily to help paint signs and pick out plants for the sensory garden. Later, as Tanya watched Lily happily painting with the other kids, Mrs. Harper leaned over and said softly, "You've done something truly amazing, Tanya. You've shown my daughter, and so many others, what it means to be strong and selfless." Tanya's cheeks flushed, but she smiled. "I couldn't have done it without everyone's support," she said. "It's a team effort." By the following summer, the second park was complete. This time, Tanya stood at the forefront of the opening ceremony, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "This park represents more than just a place to play," she said, her gaze sweeping over the faces before her. "It's a place where everyone can feel welcome and included, no matter who they are or what challenges they face. And it's proof that when communities come together, amazing things can happen." The applause was thunderous, but Tanya's focus was on the smiling faces of the children exploring the park for the first time. She saw kids in wheelchairs zooming along the smooth paths, others laughing as they played on the adaptive swings, and even a few parents wiping away tears of joy. Standing at the edge of the crowd, Jake, Ethan, and Ryan watched with pride. "She's incredible," Ryan said, shaking his head in awe. "She always has been," Jake agreed. "We're just lucky she forgave us and let us be part of this journey." Ethan nodded, his eyes misty. "I don't think I've ever been prouder of anything in my life." The success of the second park solidified Tanya's circle as a national movement. News outlets across the country covered the grand opening, sharing heartwarming footage of children of all abilities enjoying the new space. The group's online platform saw a surge in activity as people from all walks of life reached out, inspired to start similar projects in their own communities. One of those messages came from a woman named Clara, who lived in a rural area of Texas. Her email read, "Dear Tanya and the Circle team, I live in a small town where resources are limited, and my son, who uses a wheelchair, has never had a playground he could fully enjoy. Your story gives me hope. Is there any way we could bring something like your parks to our community?" The message struck a chord with Tanya. She forwarded it to Jake, Ethan, and Ryan, who immediately began brainstorming ways to help. "We should visit Clara's town," Jake suggested. "See the park for ourselves and meet the community. If they're willing to pitch in, we can make it happen." Ethan nodded. "And maybe we can use some of the grant money to kickstart the project." Ryan grinned. "Road trip, anyone?" Tanya laughed, her heart lifting at their enthusiasm. "Let's do it," she said. The trip to Texas was a turning point for Tanya and her team. Clara's town welcomed them with open arms, eager to collaborate on creating their own inclusive park. Tanya met Clara's son, a cheerful 8-year-old named Ben, who shared her love of books and had an infectious laugh. "Thank you for coming," Clara said, her voice filled with emotion as she watched Tanya and Ben chatting. "You've already given us so much hope." Tanya smiled. "We're just getting started." Over the next few months, Tanya's circle worked closely with Clara and her community to design the park. They held fundraisers, met with local officials, and even recruited volunteers from neighboring towns. The project brought people together in ways no one had expected. Farmers donated materials, high school students helped with construction, and a local artist painted a stunning mural featuring children of all abilities playing together. When the park was finally unveiled, it was a sight to behold. Ben was the first to use the adaptive zip line, his laughter echoing across the park as his mother wiped away tears. "This isn't just a park," Clara said to Tanya during the ceremony. "It's a new beginning for our town, and we owe it all to you." Back at home, Tanya reflected on how much her life had changed since the first park project. Her days were filled with travel, speeches, and planning sessions. But she also made time for herself. She had started painting as a hobby, finding it a relaxing way to unwind after long days of work. Her wheelchair basketball team had also become a source of joy and camaraderie, and she had even started mentoring younger players. Jake, Ethan, and Ryan had grown as well. Jake was applying to medical school, inspired by his experiences working with Tanya. Ethan had become a vocal advocate for disability rights, using his storytelling skills to raise awareness. Ryan, always the creative one, had started designing accessible play equipment and hoped to patent his own inventions one day. "You've changed us, Tanya," Jake said during one of their regular meetups at the park, "in ways I don't think we'll ever fully understand." Tanya smiled, her heart full. "And you've shown me that people are capable of incredible growth," she replied. "I wouldn't be where I am without you." One evening, while visiting a new park opening in a nearby city, Tanya was approached by a man she didn't recognize. He seemed hesitant, fidgeting nervously before finally speaking. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Tanya?" Tanya nodded, offering a polite smile. "That's me. Can I help you?" The man took a deep breath. "I don't know if you remember me, but I'm the father of the little boy you saved at the bus station." Tanya froze, her mind racing as the memory of that day came flooding back. "My name's David," he continued, his voice trembling. "I never got the chance to thank you properly. You saved my son's life, and I'll never forget that." Tanya's eyes welled with tears as she extended her hand. "It's good to meet you, David," she said. "How is your son?" "He's doing great," David replied, pulling out his phone to show her pictures of a smiling boy holding a soccer ball. "He's healthy and happy, thanks to you." The encounter left Tanya deeply moved, a poignant reminder of the ripple effect her actions had set in motion. As Tanya's work gained recognition, opportunities to expand the impact of Tanya's circle began to emerge on a global scale. One day, she received an invitation to speak at an international summit on accessibility and inclusion in Geneva, Switzerland. The email read, "Dear Ms. Tanya, your story has inspired people across the globe. We would be honored if you would join us as a keynote speaker at the upcoming Global Summit on Inclusion and Accessibility. Your leadership has sparked a movement, and your voice is essential to the conversation about creating a more inclusive world." Tanya sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the honor. She immediately called Jake, Ethan, and Ryan to share the news. "Switzerland?" Ryan exclaimed. "That's incredible, Tanya." "You're going to inspire a whole new audience," Ethan added. Jake grinned. "And it's about time the world hears your story." At the summit, Tanya stood before an audience of leaders, activists, and changemakers from dozens of countries. As she shared her journey, from her life-changing accident to the creation of Tanya's Circle, she saw tears in the eyes of many attendees. "When I was younger," Tanya said, her voice steady, "I often felt invisible. But I've learned that even the smallest voices can create the loudest echoes when they are joined by others. Together, we can build a world where no one is left behind." The crowd erupted into applause, a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. Afterward, attendees approached Tanya to thank her, sharing how her words had inspired them to take action in their own communities. Not long after Tanya returned home from the summit, she received a message from a young woman named Claire. The email was simple but heartfelt. "Hi, Tanya. I'm a college student studying architecture, and your story has inspired me to specialize in designing accessible spaces. I'd love to meet you in person someday to learn more about your journey. Thank you for being such a powerful example of courage and kindness." Tanya smiled as she read the email. She responded quickly, inviting Claire to meet her at the park that had started it all. When they met, Tanya was struck by Claire's enthusiasm and passion. As they talked, Tanya shared stories of her challenges and victories, while Claire spoke excitedly about her dreams of designing spaces that were inclusive and welcoming to everyone. By the end of their conversation, Tanya felt a renewed sense of purpose. Claire's dedication reminded her of how far the movement had come and how much further it could still go. "You're going to change the world," Tanya said, smiling warmly. Claire shook her head. "I'm just following the path you paved for me." One quiet evening, Tanya found herself alone in the park, sitting on her bench. The stars twinkled overhead, and the distant sound of laughter from a nearby family filled the air. She thought back to everything that had happened since that fateful day at the bus station. The pain, the recovery, the bullying, and the transformation. It all felt like a lifetime ago. For so long, Tanya had defined herself by her wheelchair, by what she couldn't do. But now, she realized that her true strength had never been about her physical abilities. It was about her resilience, her determination, and her ability to inspire change. As she sat there, a sense of peace washed over her. She no longer felt invisible. She felt seen, valued, and proud of the person she had become. Years later, Tanya's circle had grown into a global organization, with chapters in dozens of countries and countless lives impacted by its work. Tanya herself had become a beloved figure, admired not only for her advocacy but also for her humility and grace. One day, during a gathering at the original park, Tanya stood on the stage surrounded by her friends and supporters. The park was more vibrant than ever, a living symbol of what could be achieved through compassion and collaboration. Jake, now a doctor, stepped forward to present Tanya with an award on behalf of the community. The plaque read, "To Tanya, a light in the darkness, a voice for the voiceless, a hero to us all."